Welcome back to Proxy, everybody. And today I have Native Exarch with me, who is just starting out in 40k. And believe it or not, he's actually a blind Warhammer 40k competitive player, and he's just starting out 40k for the first time. How you doing today, Native Exarch?
I'm doing pretty good. Just to kind of give you, as he said, I'm Native Exarch. Native because I'm Native American. Specifically, I am Oglala Lakota from the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and Exarch because, you know, aspect warriors. Um,
Absolutely, they're
so,
the best.
right, naturally being over here, I'm an Eldar player. So I'm actually doing pretty good.
Awesome, dude. Awesome. That's really cool. I didn't know you were Native American. That's awesome. Wow.
I didn't give you my last name; it would have given it away right away.
Well, of course, of course. Well, when you reached out to me, I was actually really surprised because I had never heard of somebody who was blind being able to play Warhammer 40K. You think it's a game that requires you to have, the ability to see the models and stuff like that. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, well, of course it's possible, right? I mean, you know, the board layouts, terrain, models, those are all things you can kind of feel out, and you can have them described to you. And so tell me a little bit about that. Like, what got you into thinking about playing Warhammer 40K?
So it's kind of crazy. When I was 15 years old, I'm 35 now. When I was 15 years old, my bro David and I were talking, and he mentioned Warhammer, and he said, "Oh," which now that I think about it, some of the stuff he said was, he's like, "Oh, you have to measure for distance." I was like, "Yeah," and he's like, "You have to roll to see if you're seen." I'm like, looking back on that, I was like, "Was that ever a rule?" But anyway, he was talking about this game Warhammer, and I was like, "Oh, sounds pretty interesting." And I dismissed even being able to play it. I didn't even think about it.
Hmm.
And then um, I had heard about the God Emperor. I forget even how. Oh no, that's what it was. Uh, I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, and I read fan fiction. And there was this story called Harry Potter and the God Emperorless Heathens, and I don't know how, but I was like, "That's Warhammer 40k." So I start listening to it, and I didn't know anything about the setting at the time. I didn't know what a Space Marine was. I didn't know what a Grey Knight was. Kind of after last night, kind of still wish I didn't know what a Grey Knight was, but we'll get to that. Um, so, and then my bro was running TTRPGs, and he was running Dark Heresy, which as people, Dark Heresy is a tabletop role playing game set in the 41st millennium. You play as an agent of an Inquisitor. Um,
That's
and so
cool.
that got me into Warhammer. He explained a little bit, and I started looking into stuff, like looking into what Space Marines were and looking into um what different things were. And I was like, wow. So I looked into some battle reports, and I was like, huh. And again, this was back in like 2017, so like scatter dice and all that was still a thing. And I was like, okay, I probably can't play the game, but it's cool to watch. So
Right.
I thought I would never be able to play. I never even occupied the idea of playing, even though I'd come across an article of somebody who couldn't see. It didn't click in my head. He was partially blind. It didn't click in my head that he could actually play, or that I could actually play. And then, so this is gonna sound crazy. I'd finally, I'd come into a little bit of money, and I thought about it, and I don't know what made me do it, but I used, of all things, Chat GPT and looked up blind 40k players, and it gave me this whole thing about these different blind people that actually played and how they did it, and I was like, it's possible. And then I talked. I went into a 40k group, which I was a part of a 40k group. Ironically, it's really weird. I like joined a 40k group. I would watch lore videos. People like Luton, people like Wes Hammer. You
Right.
know, And so I always found it interesting. I and then I saw that, and I was like, oh, I can play. And then this money came in, and I was like, is Spirit directing me to do this. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do it. So I fell in love with Harlequins. The whole story of what they are, the fact that they go from even the Dark Kin to the Exodites to the Craft Worlders, that they will perform the great play, that they are a literal reminder through the dances they perform, the plays they perform to the people. They um, the solitaire being a representation of Slanesh. And that's why when you take on that, you live that life of solitude, you know.
Hmm.
So I fell in love with Harlequins. And I used to always say, if I was going to play 40K, I always say, if I could play 40K, I'd be a Harlequins player.
That's cool.
So, when I finally did, I realized Harlequins aren't their own faction. And I just like, all right, cool. I was perfectly fine transitioning to Eldar. The only thing that I made sure of was I'm going to have a solitaire on my list.
And that's a good choice. Solitaire is one of
You
my
know,
favorite models.
um, and it just so that's kind of how that happened. I bought my army, had to go through a bunch to get it, which, as you know, because I was giving you an update every single freaking delay I dealt with. But
Yeah,
and then
USPS sometimes is very slow with shipping and stuff like that.
speaking of which, I need to see if that Farseer came in.
Yeah, it should be there soon.
Right, right. So that's kind of how that happened. I looked into different things. I was really apprehensive, I'll be honest, about when I finally got things because things were becoming real. I was talking to people, trying to ask questions, asking this and that. Battle reports aren't really as helpful to me because I can't see what they're doing. They'll say, "Oh, I'm going to run this up here. I'm going to tuck this behind this wall." Okay, I mean that's good, but that doesn't tell me. Okay, are you doing that on the flank or on the mid? Or are you going? Are you tucking that behind a wall near the midboard? Or,
Right.
sometimes they'll say, "Oh, I'm going to go toward the center objective," or "I'm going to do this. I'm going to stage here." It depends. You know.
Yeah.
Um, I actually, and I'm not just saying this because, well, I'm not just saying this because I'm here with you, but I am saying this. But your videos are actually some of the most informative because you do tactics videos because you explain what's going on.
Oh, I didn't
Um,
know that.
yeah,
Thank you.
your videos are really helpful. Uh, although something you kind of talked up, I actually tried last night. The Dire
Yes.
Avenger and a sermon coming out of a falcon.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the combo is has potential. I've seen some competitive players run it. I prefer a Zerman with 10 dire vendors. Or,
Yeah,
you know,
I see why.
yeah, the Overwatch is really good. And then you throw guide on them, and things can
See,
get
I,
kind of
I didn't have
crazy.
a Farseer, and that's
Mm,
the other thing.
right.
I don't have a Farseer in my list, which I should probably eventually, when we get to that, I'll run over the list.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I think the combo I like is throwing a Zerman out there with 10 Dire Avengers and putting him in a position where he can overwatch things, right? So guide, throwing guide on the unit and overwatching. But the 6-man or, 5-man and a Falcon unit is more of a unit that is trying to get into close combat.
See, I
It,
didn't see that. I didn't realize. I was
yeah.
trying to run them as it, and see that was the issue. I was trying
Uh,
to run them as an Overwatch unit
right.
because
And
what I did, yeah, well, yeah,
yeah, no, totally. And I think a lot of people do run them like that. And I think, I did make a video recently that talked about the potential of a 5-man unit, like being able to kill, a good number of Achillans, but that was mostly like if you already have this in your list, this is a tool that can maybe deal with them if you set them up
yeah. I
correctly.
wish I'd known that. See, I saw that video, and that's actually what made me decide to do it.
Ah, yeah, because against Achillans, yeah, you can Overwatch and do some good damage, but they're Achillans. I mean, Grey Knights are
Right,
2+ armor save, toughness 4, and they're going to be a
right.
lot harder to drop without some significant, firepower. Whenever I go against Grey Knights, my bread and butter is Wind Riders with uh, a Farseer Skyrunner because when they come down, I could just overload on them and usually kill a full 5-man unit, kill a librarian. You know, my buddy that plays Grey Knights, he runs his librarians as solo characters. So he picks them
Okay.
up and he just drops them as solo characters so they're easier to like deep strike in. So I have basically what I have to do against him is I have to set up to where if he drops a solo character, there's about a 50% chance I'm just going to destroy him in one hit because of a fusion gun or because of, if I'm running the Avatar of Cain or if I'm running, a Brightlands Guardians in the background. I just make it very apparent that he could possibly lose that librarian before he even deep strikes it. So
Right.
that risk is like always in my opponent's mind. Like, do I really want to risk that 4-up invul save and just what if I whiff it and nothing happens and I lose my 100 plus point character? So like they sometimes have to play more cautious because of it. Or do I want to
Right.
drop my, strike squad in the backfield, just to be killed by, a bunch of Wind Riders? That's the idea. But I love Wind Riders. I'm getting a little
I'm
off track
actually,
here, but yeah,
yeah.
those are really good at Overwatch. So if you're looking for a unit that's really good Overwatch, you either want to just go all in on the Dire Avengers with the Zerman, or you want to go with Wind Riders, big unit of Wind Riders. But
Yeah.
the competitive players use a Zerman and a Falcon because what you can do is he has dev wounds. So
Right.
you can throw him forward with Dire Avengers. They can shoot, deal some lethal hits. He can charge in, get full rerolls to wound, and then you can be in a position to get some chip damage off of a free Overwatch against another target that comes in. So,
Okay.
yeah, so that's kind of how you want to run them. You want to run them more like, think more striking scorpions with Kahandras out of a Falcon initially,
Okay.
but then instead of just dying afterward, which Kahandras and striking scorpions often do once they hit their target, with a Zerman's unit, you can overwatch, and then a Zerman is a little bit more durable, so you can perhaps keep him alive longer.
I see. I see. That actually makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. My pleasure, dude. I want you to win. I want you to beat this Grey Knight opponent. So, speaking of, you just recently had a game against your buddy. He plays Grey Knights. He was able to kind of introduce you to the game. How did that game go?
So yeah, about that. So first I will say that things were easier yet more difficult than I envisioned.
Mm-hmm.
So initial deployment was actually pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Um, the biggest issue I realize is I didn't ask enough questions. So in my brain, I thought I had to memorize where everything was on the board. I didn't think to ask, hey, where are those Terminators? I like, you know, where are where are Crow and his unit? Where, so that was a lot of the issue. And I think I was more concerned with the minutia of all of that and the minutia of, you know, how do you say, um, I was more bogged down in the moment of accommodations as a blind person, and I was not thinking as a 40K player in that moment for
Right.
as at certain points. There were moments when my common sense seemed to kick back on, um, and I realized my target priority was way off. Case in point, I was playing really cautiously. I was trying to keep things in transports for a really long time. Um, I didn't realize that his three librarians, and no, I did not stutter. Um, Three librarians were attached to a unit of five Terminators. And I had a solitaire that picked up over half the unit. The problem is, idiot me forgot, oh, yeah, Terminator solitaire has precision. I should have just picked up that librarian. And I should have picked up the librarian. I should have disembarked fire dragons and would have picked up it probably would have picked up his one of his two dread knights. I know I would have probably been able to wipe them both because I wiped one of his dread knights with uh the serpent shield. Oh, I should go over the list I used um as I continue. So I had let's see, two fire prisms, an Autark Wayleaper with the Weeping Stones, 2 units of Warp Spiders, 2 units of Rangers, a unit of Shadow Specters, a Solitaire, a Death Jester, a Sermon, and 5 Dire Avengers, a Falcon, and a Wave Serpent.
Nice, pretty balanced list overall.
So I popped the Wave Serpent shield. I think I got like 2 wounds, 2 mortals off of that. Got 2 mortals off of the grenade strat because I'd finally disembarked the fire dragons, and then I shot into it and picked up the Dread Knight.
Right.
Um, and I just after the game I realized, you know, I should have done things very differently. Um, I should have prioritized getting those librarians off the board and then prioritize getting the 2 Dread Knights off the board. I feel like the Terminators wouldn't have been that big a deal after that.
Right. And you had two
Um,
ranger units too. And the best way to kind of use rangers in the beginning against Grey Knights is, Grey Knights don't really have a lot of infiltration. They mostly revolve around deep striking. So you don't have to worry about screening out infiltrators. One of the things you want to use your rangers for in the early game is baiting out his units because he has to deal with them, right? He has to kill the
right.
rangers at some point. So using your rangers to bait out a strike squad, which is way more expensive than the unit of Terminators, can give you some good trades in the early game, especially if he has characters attached to those units. And if he doesn't take strike squads, if he's just taking Terminators, like your opponent doesn't have a lot of cheap units to be able to deal with that. He has to commit something to killing those Rangers. And at that point, you can send out your Fire Dragons. You can send out a Zerman's unit, which, by the way, a Zerman's really good at killing Grey Knight Terminators. Like, as long as they're not Paladins, like, he's really good at it, you
It's
know?
actually funny. I'd use and thank you for that. See, I'd use the Rangers as I I infiltrated them up and I ran them in because I was trying because I played fixed secondaries. That's another thing which I don't think I'll do again. And I played behind enemy lines and engaged on all fronts.
Right.
Once he wiped the unit of warp spiders and the unit of rangers that I had there, I could not really achieve any of my secondaries. And holding holding primaries seemed like an effort in futility. Um, and freaking what is it? What's that ability? Vortex of Doom or Doom Vortex, I think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Vortex
learned to
of
hate
Doom.
that ability.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. It's
Uh,
one of
And
the most annoying Grey Knight abilities in their entire index because it's kind of like Doom Bolt, right? Like no one likes Doom Bolt, and Vortex of Doom is pretty much the same thing.
it's the way my bro describes it. He's like, it's Smite on steroids.
Yeah, yeah,
And
basically.
I'm like, see, and there is no such thing as denying the witch this edition.
Hmm.
So
Yep, there's no way to
there,
to get rid of it too. Yeah,
so it's kind of like seriously, that's what we're doing. Um, it would you know what? I think it'd be kind of cool if they brought that concept back, where if someone was going to cast that, you could like pay a CP for denying a strategy, or
yeah,
it could be an ability. Like I think we don't have to have a psychic phase. Like they could do that.
right. No, I totally agree
You
with you.
know,
I think that should be a thing. I think it should be part of the general stratagems. And maybe some factions have models that can use it more often. Like Eldar could have
yeah.
a ability called Runes of Warding, which allows them to use something twice, to use the
Oh, you
stratagem
mean you could
twice.
actually make a shadow seer actually, viable? Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm,
absolutely.
I'm sorry. I'm all right. um, but yeah, like it's it's crazy because I the one thing I will say now, I come from a card game background, so Magic,
Hmm.
Yu-Gi-Oh, stuff like that. So the one thing that was getting to me in my brain, ADHD brain, so the not being able to really do much on my opponent's turn was something that was getting to me.
Right.
So like I have no way of like In Magic, there are interrupts. There are in Yu-Gi-Oh! Even there are like traps and things. We don't have that over here. Like, yeah, there are some stratagems that are reactionary, and then my dumbass forgot all about lightning fast react, and then finally remembered lightning fast react, but forgot it was a -1 to hit, not a -1 to wound. But moving on.
Yeah. Yeah, that can be
Um,
tough to get used to, especially if you're going against things that auto hit, you know?
yeah, and so yeah, I was definitely that was a big thing, was getting used to the not being able to do anything really.
Yeah.
Like that everything you do pretty much is on your turn.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that used to be even more the case in prior editions. It's just with the advent of stratagems, interrupts, and stuff like that, that's changed slightly. Like people can overwatch, people can, interrupt in combat, people can heroically intervene, right? So there's some things that you can do in your opponent's turn, like people can rapid ingress, but it's not to the point of like, a card game where you have something like, Dispel that you can throw down in Magic the Gathering and just, cancel your
Right. There
opponent's
is no
ability.
counter spells or mana leaks or anything like that.
Right. Exactly. Like if it's your turn for the most part, you're in control and you get to kind of do what you want, with some
Right.
exceptions. But yeah.
Right.
So yeah, let me ask you this. Now you played the game. Now you told me earlier you played until turn three just because it kind of got to the point where you couldn't score anything because of the secondaries. And that was interesting because I remember the first game that I played where secondary objectives got introduced. I did the exact same thing. I took fixed
Huh.
objectives. And I took two that I thought would do really well, and my opponent instantly, being more experienced, having played a few games, just wiped out any unit that could score secondary objectives. And I was like, well, there you go. I was like, oh well, I guess I can't score anything, right?
Right.
Yeah,
I couldn't because I'm not going to send things. I wasn't really sending anything into the freaking midboard just to try to bang it out with these termies because that's
right.
not going to end well. I didn't have anything, you know, durable enough.
Hmm.
Which is funny because my list originally contained your brain a and some Storm Guardians,
Right.
which would have actually probably done better. Which I'm actually, funnily enough, thinking about dropping a sermon and the Dire Avengers, and my Fire Dragons on foot and replacing them with uh, her and the unit of Storm Guardians.
Yeah, Storm Guardians are good. You
Again,
got sticky objectives. Your Vrain makes them a little bit tougher. They already have a 5+ invul save. They're kind of like lesser Harlequins at that point, really, for cheaper points,
right, and
right?
I mean, and if I physically had Quins, then I would
Quins.
run her with a unit of Quins, but I didn't. I don't know. I think I decided on. I think I just and see a lot of my list I made without fully understanding certain things.
Right.
That was another thing. Because
Yeah, I mean,
um
that's going to happen, right? Like when you build a list for the first time, there's going to be elements of your list that don't really work. Like even in some of my recent lists, like that I built for Pariah Nexus and with the recent changes, like when I put them on the table, I realize, oh, okay, this doesn't really work or this isn't really necessary. Like I had a list with 3 units of Corsairs and 3 Wave Serpents, and what I realized, and I had 3 Falcons to back it up, what I realized was I don't really need the third Wave Serpent. I probably can get away with just 2 Wave Serpents with Corsairs in them, and then just, the third Wave Serpent was just a waste, right? So
right.
you recognize these things in the game, like when you're drawing your secondaries, you're like, oh, I could just perform this secondary action with this Wave Serpent. I can scout up, perform a secondary. I don't really need this third Wave Serpent that's just kind of sitting there, not doing much, right? You know?
Right. I think playing into I think having like doing tacticals would be a much better idea, I think,
Yeah.
personally. And then like I said, the getting used to um like it's a different type of resource management in 40K.
Hmm.
That's another thing. I think I was still playing in that card game mindset of keep things alive. You know,
Right.
it was a different type of resource management.
Yeah, because
And that's
absolutely.
another thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Your units
You
are resources that you need to trade. Like you need to, because back in the day that very much was the thing. Like back in, like, let's say 5th edition or 4th edition, or even up to the later editions like 6th edition, you wanted to keep as much stuff alive as possible while also killing your opponent.
right,
That was basically the strategy behind every game. But now, because of objectives and because of how line of sight works and the terrain layouts and stuff like that, there are things you need to put out there to trade with your opponent. And Eldar are actually really good at this, and a lot of people maybe don't think so, but the reason why they're good at it is because we have really affordable units that do a lot of damage
hmm
for the cost. And we have units that are cheap throwaway. Like, we have units that are sub 60 points, like Rangers, that can infiltrate, give you some utility and score for you, but at the same time open up some trades later on. We have units like Fire Dragons who can come out and do a lot of damage. We have combos like Gahandras and Striking Scorpions who can come out for a relatively low price, 165 points, or 155 points, excuse me, even cheaper than I thought, and destroy an entire unit of 8 bound, and then force your opponent to be like, well, I just lost that trade, right? By like double the points cost,
right.
you know? And we
And I
have
think,
units like
yeah,
that.
that I think a lot of it is learning how to prioritize. Because once I actually started realizing, like looking back on the game, okay, and knowing for me it was also knowing what poignant questions to ask. Um, you know, realizing, okay, I have a unit of Howling Banshees. I'm gonna shoot them forward. They're gonna mince. I'm gonna send them into something. You
Hmm.
know, they're probably not gonna survive for very long.
Right. Yeah, definitely not against
You
Terminators.
know,
Yeah. But they can finish
so
something off. And that's kind of how you
I
also
had
have
to
to
realize,
think, like, how do I use my units in conjunction with each other to perform a certain task? So a lot of times, one unit of ours isn't enough. Like, one unit Howling Banshees isn't enough to do some significant damage to Terminators. If you throw them into Terminators, what's going to happen is you may kill one Terminator, and then you're going to die. And it's just not a good trade,
right,
right? So, like, using your Howling Banshees to clean up a Terminator unit is way better, because what's going to happen is like, let's say you use fire dragons and a wave serpent shield to kind of like soften the terminators up. Maybe you kill like 3 or 4 of them, and then, or maybe just, let's say, 3, and then your howling banshees charge in, they kill another one. Now your opponent is going to lose that combat against howling banshees because he doesn't have many attacks back, right? So even though that terminator squad
right,
isn't dead, it's functionally dead, because he either has to fall them back, and then he just has one model left, which you can kind of pick up at your leisure whenever you want, or they stay in combat, they do some more damage, and then your Howling Banshees end up finishing the Terminator squad off, and then you win that combat, right? So, like, sometimes you do
and
have to
then
combine units like that to achieve your goals.
so it's like, so like you said, you pop the serpent shield, then you send your fire dragons, and they pick up some of the unit, and then the banshees go in, and they will probably kill off another one, so there's only one left,
Mm-hmm.
and then and I'm assuming they don't have you know a melee weapon, so yeah,
Well, I mean, yeah, Terminators, I mean, Grey Knight Terminators do, right? I mean, they have, like, regular
right,
Terminators have the Power Fist, and then the Grey Knight Terminators have
right,
the Nemesis Force weapons or whatever they have. But even so, I mean, you're looking at 4 attacks back, hitting on threes or twos, and then wounding on threes, or probably twos, actually. And then, you get your 4-up invuls. So you're probably going to
right,
lose 1 or 2 Howling Banshees on the clapback, which is normal, and then your Exarch is going to do
right.
most of the lifting anyway. So next turn, because you charge them when
You're
it's
just gonna
their
pick it up,
turn, right? Exactly. You get to pick.
right? And if
Yeah.
right, and then if you're on an objective, then realistically you're gonna take that objective anyway because its OC is virtually nothing. And see,
Right.
this is kind of why I wish I'd been able to really talk to you like others like you before going into my game. because I needed to know, I need to understand how to think as an Eldar player, you
Right.
know,
Yeah, it's different than other armies, for sure. And
because my friend of mine, he's my mentor, but his way of thinking, we have a similar overall way of thinking, but the way he's not, I mean, he is an Eldar player, but he's not, I don't think he plays other things, like he plays like Marines and some other stuff. He also plays GK. So I think he has a very wide view of the game.
hmm
But I think talking to someone like, say, you or even Craft World Eldar, you guys are almost mono Eldar players.
yeah, we've played Eldar basically exclusively for 20 plus years. So, like for example, I've tried to start other armies. I just don't like playing as other factions. I really don't. The only other faction I like playing actually remotely, besides Dark Eldar, because they're very similar, is Imperial Guard. They're the only faction that I really like to play besides Eldar factions. And that's just because
The only
nostalgia, that's it. you know.
the only faction I ever thought about, the only two factions I ever thought of playing other than Eldar, I well, there's three. There is, and one of them isn't even technically an actual faction, and that's what is it? Wow, just totally like Night Lords,
Oh yeah.
and that's only because of Jago Savatari. And then then um I also thought of Space Wolves, but that's only because I ended up reading the Ragnar Blackmane book, and I like the whole Norse thing they have going
Right.
on, which I've known about for a while. But and then Gene Stealers, which Gene Stealers are just interesting.
Yeah, the Gene Stealer
But yeah,
cards.
that's
Yeah.
yeah, the whole GSCs. But thing is, like, it definitely felt like there were points during the game where I felt, is this in stepping into this hobby, is this what I've signed up for, which is periods of extreme boredom and then just having my things, getting blasted kind of thing. Is that what this is? Is that what this $900 investment is? You know,
Right.
and I don't want that. I want things to continue forward, and I want to, actually because you know there is a lot here. I enjoy the tactics. I enjoy, what 40K is. I just wish I could have sort of framed things differently. I wish I could have given myself the understanding of this is your first game. You're going, but now I understand. Look, first of all, even other Grey Knights players are like, look, dude, you're an Eldar player. As a Grey Knights player, like, you guys are not going to do. You guys tend to have issues with us anyway. And then this was my first game, and I was playing against one of the top five people in our local meta.
Yeah. Yeah, that's going to be tough
So,
regardless. Like even
you know that
yeah.
that recipe was already difficult. I would say though that, like, um, to be real, like, some of the biggest inspirations to play Eldar, to continue playing Eldar, because when I realized there were faction specific channels, um, I I found Craft World Eldar first because I saw one of his unit focus videos,
hmm
and then I found you because I think I was looking for one of his unit focus videos on something, and then you had done a Wind Rider unit video, and I thought it was one of his, and then I realized, oh, this isn't. And then I started listening to you and sort of started listening to more of your stuff, and um, you guys had a slightly different take to my mentor, and I liked the way you thought because you had a thing for some of the same units I did. Like, I really like the idea of Wind Riders. That there were things that you were kind of giving credence to that my mentor, who was helping me, kind of wasn't,
hmm
and I didn't have any other point of reference at the time.
Right. Yeah, and the
So
cool thing
you,
is like, as you play the faction more and as you try more units, you will find that there's more things that the faction has to offer besides just what the quote unquote meta is, you know? Like, and I found that a lot, you
Right.
know, and I started looking actually at that in 8th edition before we got our new codex in 9th edition. In 8th edition, so I guess it would be 9th edition, but with the 8th edition, you know, index or whatever that we had, it sucked. It sucked. There was a period of time where the Eldar were like the worst faction in the game because we had an old index that was, you know, it was an index in a sea of codexes and it was in a different
Right.
edition. So we had a lot of terrible choices in the book. And I remember one of the worst choices, according to some people, was Swooping Hawks. And they, it's ironic because they're going to get this ability again. But I actually found a way to make Swooping Hawks really viable in my games. And my opponents were like, man, how many mortal wounds are you doing to me? You know, it was like you fly over an enemy unit, you deal mortal wounds. So like the whole strategy was, okay, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ensure that this 75-point unit of Swooping Hawks flies as many times over your unit as possible and does a bunch of mortal wounds to you. And like, you know, a 75-point unit was taking out 4 Terminators by just jumping over them
Right.
again and again with and my opponents were
And
always so frustrated about that. And I'd have 3 units of them, and I'd place them so that I could do it every turn with a different unit, and it was super annoying to my opponents. And it's like nobody thought to do that because they just looked at Swooping Hawks and were like, okay, that unit can't trade well. That unit's not going to be that good, and they didn't really like think of all the different applications that that unit could have. And I think that's the same way in 10th edition with some units, you know. And I've seen that with Wind Riders specifically, people not respecting them. And then once they understand, oh, this is a really strong unit. My whole unit just got obliterated in Overwatch. Or oh my god, this unit just jumped forward and killed my Terminator unit on the objective with shuriken cannons. It's like, yeah, because when you
and
layer
then
enough buffs on it,
they,
that's gonna happen.
I mean, and let's be realistic also. You have guide, so you're
Uh-huh.
re-rolling
Yep.
everything.
Yep.
You have lethal hits, or sorry, sustained one.
Yeah. And lethals from Shroud Runners usually. Like if you're taking out
Right.
something really
Um,
big.
and lethals, and then it's a flat two. It's a shuriken cannon, so we actually have something that's hitting pretty hard. And wonder of wonders, it has more than 3 toughness.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and it's like and again, so when I heard people say stuff about not shroud runners, um, wind riders, I was like, well, I don't have experience to make these calls, so I'm not gonna say anything. They seemed sensible, viable to me, but I again will admit I didn't know anything. Um, the the biggest thing that I would say um was like I think. Oh, and by the way, so I have a special disdain for Skyweavers, and it's for a very specific reason.
Really.
Because Skyweavers, they have infantry, I think anti-infantry 4 or anti-vehicle 4, I think.
Yeah. The Haywire blasters or whatever.
Yeah, and yet they cost, for 2, it's 115.
Yeah, they're expensive.
Right, whereas I can take Yvrain as my warlord, run a Yanari list, and get a unit of Scourges for 125.
Yeah.
I like had an apoplectic fit, I think, when I realized that. I was like, and you're paying for their sideswipe ability, which basically their sideswipe ability kind of does the same thing that the swooping hawks you were saying can do, except they
Worse.
issue one mortal per model, you know,
Right, that you
in the
have.
unit. Which, I mean, they could probably wreck battle line units, but it's like, so I'm paying that, and it's only and I get 2 of them for 115.
Yeah, well, it's even worse than you think
Like,
actually, because their sideswipe ability, it's not per model in the enemy unit, it's per model in your unit,
that's
which is awful. It's one of the worst abilities in the entire index. The reason
I'm like,
why they're good is twofold. One, the
Okay.
anti-vehicle is really good at finishing off tough targets because you have to understand sometimes your opponent is going to like layer a bunch of defensive stratagems on something like and certain units that you have in your army, bright lances, are going to start bouncing. So, it may take more to kill something. So, like, for example, yes, your example with Scourges is correct, though. Scourges are just the better shooting unit, right?
Right.
But the thing about Skyweavers is that if somebody pops smoke, for example, Scourges are hitting in
Right.
fives. It's going to be really hard to punch through some good damage with those. Whereas with a reroll and with possible fate dice, you're looking at much better odds to get at least 6 damage on your opponent. And sometimes that's the break point because on certain vehicles, like okay, like let's say you get a bright lance through and you do 8 damage with max damage, you max out your damage, right? And
Right.
you probably need about 5 more damage to kill the vehicle. The Skyweavers sit in the perfect position to be able to take that out because they're going to realistically almost always do at least 6 damage with their attacks, against a vehicle. They on average do about 6 to 9. There's a really good chance they're going to do 6, and there's a decent chance they're going to do 9. And sometimes if you spike, they'll do 12. But you only really need them to do 6 damage. So a lot of times when people use them, it's just as a unit to finish off a hard target that has already been targeted with like Armor of Contempt or something like that, to where you're like,
And that
okay, like
I
I need
forget what's this
something
one.
that can finish it off. That's why people run them.
Yeah.
I mean, recently there was a guy, I can't remember his name, but he was, and I reviewed his list for the World Championships. He ran 2 units of them, and I remember specifically talking to, Hayden, who was also running in the tournament on this channel about it, and I actually made the comment like, oh, maybe this is too many, right? Maybe 2 units is too much. But he actually did really good, and I think that's because, Skyweavers are a very meta dependent unit. If you're going into a lot of vehicles, they're a really useful
Mhm.
unit. If you're not, they're almost worthless. It's like they're either really good and they're really useful in your list, or they just suck. Pure and simple. And
And it-
yeah.
and and again, you're swinging back around to the learning what a unit is good for, having a unit for a specific purpose,
Hmm.
and realizing it's for that specific purpose.
Right.
And that's a
Because on
lot of what
paper it
I
doesn't
think.
look great. you know?
Right. And I think that's my issue. It again goes back to something my bro tells me because he came from the same background I did. He said the difference between a trading card game and a war game is a card is always will only do what a card does. Lava Spike, no matter what you do with it, is going to deal 3 damage to target creature or player. That is it. There is no way to make Lava Spike do anything else.
Right.
But with a Warhammer unit or with a war game unit, there's a variety of things you can potentially use it for. You could use that same unit to, if you wanted to do actions, like you said, to come in and clean something up, things like that.
Right.
And I think that's a lot of it is learning, looking at a unit on my end, looking at a unit and realizing what its potential is. Like people talk up striking scorpions, and I was kind of wondering why, but I think they have devastating wounds because of the mana blasters,
Right. Sustained hits as well.
and yeah, and sustained hits. So yeah, um, that combos. Which, to be completely honest, I sort of wish that instead of getting instead of being given lethal hits, I wish the Spirit Seer gave the Wraith constructs sustained hits 1 or 2
Right.
because that would be a lot better. That
Oh,
I
definitely.
do not understand. Like, why did they do that? Lethals and devs. So what? I either want to
Probably
not roll
balance.
sixes.
Yeah. Probably
Oh,
balance. I would have to say balance because if you give them sustained hits, what you could basically do, and this is something that, GW's rule writers, when they're writing the Eldar Index, not great as far as balance goes. But if I'm looking from it as a casual, like if I was a more casual player, like I really do think people that designed the index and stuff were like purely casual players, just throwing together things that they thought were like decent. They probably actually did start out with sustained hits, and then they realized, oh, wait a second, if I guide this unit of Wraith Guard with sustained hits, I'm re-rolling all my hits. I'm getting +1 to hit. I'm getting a bunch of dice, and then I'm able to convert a bunch of Wraith cannons via the Fate dice into dev wounds. That's probably too much, right?
Right.
Especially
I
when
mean,
you
that
can
would have
shoot
basically made,
again in the other turn, like the Wraith construct ability to shoot again
yeah,
at something. It was probably
right.
just a little bit too much.
That would have made Wraith bricks.
Oh, dude,
That would have made,
it would have
yeah,
been
that would
even
have just been,
worse.
that would have been the Eldar meta. Like
Yeah, for
Wraith
sure.
Wraith bricks would have been, you would have probably seen triple threat Wraith brick lists. I
Yeah,
would not be surprised.
yeah, I could definitely see that honestly because they were good as it is. But yeah, if they were able to get
Because
sustained hits,
I
that would
was
be insane.
sitting here, I was like, because I was like, I'm like, wait, because I even asked people, I was like, wait, am I not understanding something? Like, am I confused? Like, my brain could not process the contradiction to the point that I'm like, oh, so I even asked Alex, I was like, hey, bro, quick question, does this mean, like, does this mean that I roll if I roll a 6 on my hit, that it automatically is a 6 to wound, so it procs devs? No, that's not what that means. And I'm like, then why? That seems
Right.
contradictory. Like, I
Yeah, it
don't know.
is. It
It
is.
didn't
There
make
there's
sense.
some things that don't mix well. I think what it is basically is the lethal hits. Like I said, it was just for balance. It was because the wraith cannons would be too powerful, and the other options would also just be probably too powerful. Like the lethal hits kind of is more balanced because lethal hits generally
Oh,
is worse than sustained hits on like really high strength stuff. Like single shots with sustained hits is really good. I mean, take a look at the Avatar of Cain, right? With the Wailing Doom.
right.
Single shot weapon, sustained hits D3. It's really powerful. You could just proc it and get extra attacks with it. It's really good. Whereas if the Avatar of
I
Cain
mean, that.
had lethal hits, it'd be much worse, right?
I mean, that's basically. I mean, that's the DJ. Which
Yeah,
let's be realistic about a couple things. So with what's about to happen, that'll be fun. I wonder what's going to happen with him because the whole reason people took him was Fate's Messenger. I
right.
mean, even I ran him with Fate's Messenger.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
basically, I mean, he was the Fates messenger caddy. You can't run him without it. I tried to run a couple without it when I was running a pure Quinn's list for fun in the beginning of the edition, and what I found was having a lone op is good, but it's not really that good when you can just pick up a Autarch Wayleaper or you could just pick up something else for the cost. Like I saw even a few people in Worlds running Illic, right, for a second lone op in their army. And the Death Jester, I don't know what's going to happen to him. They're going to need, I think, change his ability. Personally, I think,
yeah, because I mean,
yeah,
it's not good because the only reason, yeah. For me, again, I had the Autarch and then I had the Solitaire. I had a DJ, but I knew he had Lone Up, but I didn't really take him like how was this? I didn't take him as a lone op. I took him more. I was going to use him as a sniper
mhm,
and didn't think to actually freaking get him into.
right.
Never mind. I'm just not even gonna. Some of my decisions were again thinking back to decisions I made. Oh, I just am kind of really regretting how things turned out. But
Well, that's
again,
how the learning process is. I mean, one of my first games that I ever played in 40K with the Eldar. I mean, I told you about this a little bit beforehand, but I basically back in third edition moved up a wave serpent full of striking scorpions into range of a land speeder, and I thought to myself, oh, it has armor 12 in the front. It'll be fine against the assault cannon that's strength 6. Like it won't like really do damage. And then my opponent's like, are you sure you want to do that? And I said yes. And then he just moved because it could fly, he just moved the land speeder to the rear armor, blocked the exit, shot it, destroyed it, and then all my striking scorpions were also destroyed because they couldn't get out of the only single door that was on the wave serpent at the time. You guys out there who are kind of old Hammer people, you'll understand the reference. But yeah, I basically lost the game right then and there. I had nothing, nothing left almost because I had put all my eggs in one basket. I had made a huge movement mistake. You're
Oof.
gonna make mistakes like that. You know what I mean? Like when you first play, and you're gonna be like, ah, oh, like those like. But those moments stick with you because I'll tell you this: I never made that mistake one other time in my entire Warhammer career when armor facings were a thing. Never made that mistake again.
I definitely, I definitely have it seared in my brain. Um,
Yeah.
Now that I know how like Avengers should run, for instance, I am gonna make that change. I'm gonna run both of those as waves. Put your brain and the put your brain and the Guardians and one wave serpent. My 2 units of fire dragons and the other, and then just do it that way. Um,
Yeah.
my hope is maybe I can string her unit out in such a way that I can string them out between the two objectives and contest them both.
So
Um,
I'm gonna tell you something right now that's gonna probably burst your bubble a little bit with that. I've tried to do that before because in theory it's a really good idea, right? But the problem
right.
is that even though you can do it with a 10-man unit like Storm Guardians, you need to make sure that your models are in coherency. And your opponent, even by killing just one model, if at the end of the phase you're not in coherency, you have to remove as many models as it takes to become back in coherency. So, I was playing around with it a little bit in the beginning of the edition, like, oh, like, can I do this and this and this with Storm Guardians and stickify two objectives at once? It's like, yeah, you can, but that's assuming your opponent's not going to do anything about it. Like, if your opponent's not going to do anything about
Ah,
it, like, perfect. Yeah, you get those objectives. But if they even shoot one thing at them, and you have to remove a model, you have to start removing all your models unless you position them just right, and there's really not a lot of ways to do that. But
okay, and
yeah,
you know what? Thank you for explaining that.
you're welcome, dude. You're welcome.
I I de- I definitely will say that like it's kind of I guess to kind of give my thoughts just overall on the end of things with yesterday's game. It was to know that I can actually do it. To I now know kind of what I'm looking for. I need some clarification on terrain to a point because like positioning behind walls was pretty easy, like behind crates and stuff was pretty easy.
Hmm.
But for some reason, like dealing with ruins, I was having some issues like trying to conceal from line of sight. Which that I think I'm just gonna have to ask a couple more questions.
Yeah, I
Um,
think the tricky part about that is all about angles, right? Like, if you're behind a ruined footprint, it's almost like a cone because your opponent can draw line of sight from either side of that footprint if they see your models, right? So if you have a unit
right.
of fire dragons behind the ruined footprint, you have to almost squeeze them together as much as possible in order to minimize the angles that your opponent can shoot them from. Like, footprints protect you mostly from first turn shooting. They're not going to protect you if your opponent can get the angles on them later in the game. That's when you have to rely more on the walls themselves and on the L shape of the wall so that your opponent can't just come around and just shoot you, right? So you're fully concealed. It's going to be interesting when we get our
Okay,
codex, honestly, because with the battle focus thing that we're going to get, it's going to be really interesting how that kind of unfolds. I actually have a video coming out on it soon because battle focus is one of my favorite Eldar abilities, but they've
that's
changed
gonna
it.
actually.
Yeah, it's going to change things a lot, honestly. What
What's
do you,
interesting is if it's even if it's just a roll to move, that'll basically make fire prisms a lot more viable in thinking because you would usually have to use a stratagem, either fire and fade or something, to get
right,
your one back. So now you don't even have to do that, which will potentially free up other options. Like
right.
now, actually taking fire prisms and say a Yanari list would actually be viable,
Right, right.
provided of yeah, you know. So that's just kind of my thinking
Totally. Yeah.
on that, and that's
As
actually
long
something
as as long as
I was
they
thinking
allow
about
fire
depending
prisms to
on
have it, for sure. Yeah, cuz
right.
yeah, Battle
Right.
Focus is weird. It's one of those weird abilities that has changed so much over the editions as far as what units can take it, how it's applied, how it works. Like, there's been different iterations of it. So, like, when GW said they're bringing Battle Focus back, my first thought was joy, but then I thought to myself, wait a second. What if it's the 8th edition Battle Focus? Which sucked ass, which is basically just everything gets assault and that's it. And that was shitty.
Ugh,
That was bad, and I don't think it's going to be that because of the
that is
fact
goodness.
that we already have so many. Like, what's the point of the assault keyword if we get assault? Like Renegade Raiders, right? Their detachment ability is advance and shoot with everything,
Right.
and that makes sense for them because they don't have a lot of assault weapons, so it's really powerful. Like turning a semi-durable faction into a faction that has more speed with advance and shoot is really good. But Eldar already have so much advance and shoot. We've already seen some of the datasheet leak, like Fuegan having, advance and shoot basically by having assault on his weapon. So I'm like, does it really make sense for GW to say, oh, you just get advance and shoot for your army ability? And it's like, hello, we already have that.
Presumably that's
Yeah.
right. And then, I mean,
So I
I
don't
think
think it's
that
going to be
definitely,
that.
wow, I'm a freaking idiot. Okay. Remember that list of mistakes? Yeah, I just realized
You just
I
realize that
completely
fire
forgot
dragons can
fire
advance
dragons
and
have,
shoot? Yeah.
yeah. And I've gone over the data sheet a bunch of times, and it's like it's just these little things just walked out of my head. Or it's like I don't know what happened. It's like my brain just was not firing on all cylinders yesterday, or it
You
was
can't
tired or
memorize
something. I
everything. You
don't
can't
know.
memorize everything, man. It's all about playing the faction enough times. Like there's no amount of prep that you can do before you start actually playing the game to be able to memorize everything that you're gonna do. Like, and that's just the case
And
with
that's
any
and
new army as well.
that and that's what I was trying to do. I think that's it. I was trying to memorize everything.
Yeah.
I was trying to think, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I know what everything does. I don't need to because my whole thing is I didn't want to have to constantly reference things because I don't know. I had this weird thought that it meant that I was less competent or that they would assume it's because I'm blind or whatever. I don't know. I had a bunch of thoughts
Hmm.
surrounding that. I think I was more concerned. You know what? That's exactly what it was. I was more concerned, I think, about being, quote, a competent blind player than just being a new player trying to become highly competitive.
Right.
I
Because
think next time around,
yeah.
I'm gonna chill out and just ask as many questions as I need to, take as much time as I need,
Hmm.
and play my game and actually, do
Right.
that. And kind of hearing you say that, I'm gonna be honest, kind of like just gave me a sense of clarity because I think that's what I was doing. I was more obsessed with, I was stuck in the being a blind player and just enjoying the game because I don't know. I thought that I don't know what my thinking was. I think I thought I'd be judged or something. I have no idea. It's illogical. Like I
Hmm.
had this complex about like, I felt like if I wasn't physically moving my models, it was an issue. And then it got to a point where I would just be like, "Yo, can you put these over here?" kind of thing. Um,
Hmm.
you know, it just I'm kind of realizing as we're talking that that's a lot of what that was,
Right.
and I kind of feel a little bit messed up because I feel like that kind of tainted the experience of my first game with all of that noise in my head. Um,
Hmm.
because when I actually started,
Truth be told, I have a similar story. And it wasn't to do with Warhammer, but War Machine. And I had come out of Warhammer
oh,
being. Have you ever played War
Warjack.
Machine?
I know
Warjacks
what it
and
is. The wonders
yeah,
of War Jackson. Yes, and yes.
and Warcasters and all that. Yeah, I really liked War Machine for a long time, but my buddy had gotten me into it at the time, and this was a guy who I regularly beat down in Warhammer 40k, and like I had this reputation at the time, which I cared about, which I don't give a shit about reputation anymore. But when I was younger and more immature, I had this reputation of a really good Eldar player, a really good war gamer, right? So like I go into War Machine. for the first time, and I'm looking at the units and I'm studying the units, I'm studying everything, trying to make the best like smaller like 35 point list for my War Machine army. And I start out, I put down my army, and I got wrecked, dude. I got absolutely wrecked, and I was like, I actually lost in 2 turns. He assassinated my caster right off the bat. And it was embarrassing, and I was like, man, like I don't know if I like this game. If you can just, if you lose one thing, you just lose the entire game. And I thought to myself later that night, I was like, actually, I think I just messed myself up with the mentality of this game. Like I psyched myself out for something that I was never going to be good at the first time I played. Like
Right,
it's
and
a learning curve,
I
you know?
think right, I think you're right because even though I was vocally saying I don't expect to win, I
Hmm.
don't expect to, but I think subconsciously I know me.
Hmm.
I have this thing about wanting to prove myself.
Hmm.
And the whole reason that I got into 40K, aside from the fact that I've always wanted to be competitive in a game, couldn't really do it with MTG when I was younger because I lived with my adopted family, and you know,
Hmm.
uh, then cards were expensive. They still are.
Right.
And I think I realized that I think you're right. Even though I was saying, "Oh no, I know I'm not gonna win. I know I'm not probably not gonna do that well." When it became a reality in that moment, yeah, I had that exact same thought. Is this what this is going to be? Just me getting blasted off the board and this, and not being able to do anything.
Right.
Um, and I realized kind of hearing someone else having that experience, you know, and then you mentioning like you're even with the Warhammer situation. I imagine a lot of people went through that with 40K where they had similar experiences to mine.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, people think
and
they're
I
going to
think,
go into it being instantly successful, and the truth is that if you go against anybody who knows the game better than you, even if they're being easy on you, they're still probably going to have the edge, and you just have to accept that and just try to learn instead of, trying to win. And I think that's the main thing and the main takeaway of it. And it's the same thing when you go from casual play with your buddies to competitive play, because I also had that transition, and I was like, for example, in fifth edition, there was a point where I was winning all the games against my buddies. I brought that same army to competitive play, and I got stomped. I played in an RTT and I went 0 for 3.
Jesus,
And
I'm sorry.
yeah, no, but it's fine because I was upset after the tournament. But then I thought about it and I was like, man, you know what? Actually, let me just look at my army and see what the problems are. And a lot of the problems became instantly apparent. Back in, fourth edition, or actually it was the beginning of fifth edition at the time. Back in early fifth edition, I was playing an army that was a fourth edition army that I had won a lot with in fourth edition, and that I was just successful with against my buddies because we weren't exactly, kind of measuring everything perfect and stuff like that. So like they would often make movement mistakes that I would capitalize on being the faster Eldar player. And when I realized
Right.
that in tournament play, I was like, I need to reinvent how I play and to, pick units that are good at being able to engage my opponents, because at the time movement was very static. Like Harlequins, for example, if you had a unit of Quins, they were really good, but they only moved 12 inches. They had fleet of foot, which you could move an extra d6 instead of assault, so you could move 12 inches plus d6. And what that meant is if my opponent stayed outside of 18 inches of them at all times, I would never be able to engage them. And that's exactly what happened. I had this big unit of Quins. They had the Shadow Seer in there. Again, Old Hammer people will know this. Huge brick was really devastating, could kill anything it charged. But the issue
Right.
was, if you could never get into combat, there's no point. And, my opponents would screen me out. They would just line up like a squad of, 5 scouts blocking the Harlequins. So my Harlequins would have to charge into them. And then they would just be waiting there with a bunch of flamers and guns, and I just never got
And shoot
got
them.
anything done, you know? And it was like on paper, it was this really good unit. It was a really good unit against my buddies. Against really competitive players, it was not a good unit. And I had to learn the hard way. And it was a transition from, from kind of
You,
casual, like
you
buddy
know,
play to competitive play. And that's when I
and,
started
and
changing the way I thought about my army.
I think now that you say that, like, yeah, still in the pit of my stomach, I'll be honest. Like, I do have some trepidation about my next game,
Hmm.
but I do think it's going to be a little bit different because I'll at least be able to. I think also by like taking small. One of the things is taking small successes.
Right.
Popping that Dread Knight, that was a success.
Absolutely, man.
Picking up a good chunk of that Terminator unit, that was a success. Being able to you know screen out my backline effectively, especially against Grey Knights, that is definitely a success. Um,
Absolutely.
Things like that. So I think that's a big thing. I think also when I go up, I need to when I go up to play again, one, interact with my opponent more, just in general, because I think that's another thing. Um, Trying to hold, like you said, trying to hold everything in my head is not a good thing. I think that's what I was more fixated on.
Right.
And then just realizing, like, I'm really glad that we're having that that this is kind of happening. It's weird that it's happening in real time, but or I should say on YouTube, but at the same time, it's good because hearing this from another Eldar player, a more experienced Eldar player who kind of went through a similar thing, it's kind of making me evaluate that, okay, he is a competitive player. Like Mason is a competitive player.
Right.
And so he he told me straight up, he's like, look, I'm not gonna make it easy for you. And I'm glad he did that.
Right.
Like the owner of our store was like, Mason, you brought your Grey Knights against this dude and it's his first game. But I'm kind of glad he did that because I feel like
Yeah.
if I had done, it's gonna sound weird, if I'd done too well, I wouldn't have. I don't think I would have learned anything.
Yeah. No, true. You learn more from your
That makes
mistakes. No, that makes perfect sense. I
sense.
actually, one of my first, not first games with Eldar, but the first game of 40K I ever had, my hand was held the entire time playing basically by the store manager, and I was a little kid, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't learn anything from the game, right? Like I set up my
Right.
Imperial Guard army. At the time I had Imperial Guard, I had my Basilisk. My first ever game, the first shot I ever made with my army was with the Basilisk. First dice I ever rolled, I completely destroyed a Land Raider with the Basilisk. And back then, if you destroyed a transport that had dudes in it with a ordnance weapon, everything was destroyed. Everything inside as well, just dead, right? So this guy that I was playing
Right.
against had this huge Death Star inside of like Terminators, Captain, and Terminator armor and stuff like that. Completely gone, turn one. And he had 2 units of 5 Marines left. And it was like, I didn't learn anything from that game. Like, nothing. I just destroyed his army before he even got the chance to do anything. And that was my experience. And I didn't learn a single thing. I had fun, sure. I had fun rolling the dice and killing his stuff and watching a 40-year-old dude like lose to, lose to an 8-year-old. But I mean, like, who cares? Like, at the end of the day, it was like I got really lucky, and because I was being told the rules by somebody and like basically being guided through everything, I was able to do it, and I just didn't learn anything from the experience, you know. So, I mean, I get it. The
Right.
GW
And
employee was just trying to get me to have fun. That was the point. But still, you know.
I definitely can agree. And I think that with everything, like you said, it's gonna be a learning experience, a continued learning experience. I think I will kind of give myself the acknowledgement, I guess, of doing this and showing that it can be done, that a blind person can be involved in this hobby and can do it at a competitive level, which is still my intention.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah. And it
you
should
know,
be. If that was your initial goal, it should be.
and
And as you play more games, you just have to start thinking about how you're going to adapt to the competitive environment. And I think with our new codex coming out, we're going to have a lot more fun options anyway. And just, the best thing to do at the start to learn the rules is just put together something that you find fun. And then when you realize that certain things don't work, you just swap those things out, right? Like if you notice
I mean, I
that, for example, okay, like that 5-man fire dragon unit on foot, if you notice that's not needed in your list, or the dire avengers in a in a Zerman, if that's not working for you, then you can swap those out for other units, and you can swap those units out for things that you need. Like maybe you need a squad of swooping hawks to score objectives easier, right? You said you had trouble with that, right? Or take tactical
right
objectives. Those are
and
the things you have to kind of realize when you're making those mistakes in game, and just make those
right
changes.
and I'll also be honest that some of the decisions that I made came down to what I had because
Right.
I'd gotten the Dire Avengers because my bro was like, "Oh, you don't have much Overwatch," and then I was like, "Oh, they have the Overwatch thing, so I'll add some Dire Avengers." And then I'd found out that Shadow Specters were going to be legends,
Hmm.
so
Yeah, they're not
I
going to be
took
around.
one of the unit of
Hmm.
Shadow Specters out, and I left the other unit in my list for points cushioning.
Right.
So when our codex comes out, I know there's going to be some points adjustments I need to make. So I'm going to. That's why they're there.
Right.
As of right now. Now, yeah, I do plan on, like I said, dropping the on foot fire dragons and adding your brain, and at least I can, contest, some stuff in the midboard and stuff.
Hmm.
Um, she, they're a bit more durable. They have a couple few guardian guns, so
Hmm.
there's a little bit of something there.
Yeah, something you could
Um,
also consider, just looking on your list from the outside that I didn't even think about, but you have a falcon. Why don't you put the fire dragons in the falcon, and then drop the dire avengers, and then just keep a Zerman in the Falcon with the Dire Avengers, and then you can kind of have the best of both worlds. You can or not the Dire Avengers, excuse me, the Fire Dragons. You can have a Zerman on his own, and he can kind of do his own thing. He can kind of act as more of a melee character at that point, and then you can have the Fire Dragons, being there for support, so they could also jump out, shoot some fusion guns, get rerolls to wound out of the Falcon, stuff like that. I mean, that might work too. You know?
Definitely, I think that might actually that might be a better idea because that way, I don't know what to replace the. Well, one thing I can do is I can put the Phoenix gem back on the Autark
Hmm.
because I have the winged Autark,
Right.
and
That's
that would
really good too.
be that's 20 points. So that would be I'd have 50 left. Um, I don't know what else I could use them for.
Yeah, for 50
Last
points is a hard break point, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to look at your
because
list,
there's
by the
no
way, like later on. I'm happy to
that,
look at it and kind of see like what you have, because I don't
that
know
would
exactly what you have also.
yeah.
So that's another thing.
Oh yeah, and the only thing that I have currently is I have another. I'm not trying to use the Shadow Specters because again they're legends.
Hmm.
They're legends. So I have Yvrain and I have the Guardians, so I can somehow work those back in. Which in my original incarnation of this list, they were there as just a something to uh, that my opponent would have to deal with.
Yeah,
Basically, they're going to push them in the mid or stick them on the maybe the center objective and see what happens.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
you
I
know
think
what
they're
though?
OC.
I would say this: be wary of sticking them in the center. I would stick them on either the
Okay.
right or the left side, because in the center you don't, sometimes on certain train layouts you don't have as much support as you would think you have, right? So like when your opponent does strike you back, sometimes you don't have enough units in that vicinity to be able to kind of jump out and kill them. I would always go towards the left or the right side, depending on where your ruins are that you're mostly going to be deploying behind, because then you can ensure that that objective with Storm Guardians is going to be sticky the next turn, you know? And then that's going to make it really
Okay.
hard for
Now
your opponent. Yeah.
I have a question. So, and this is just a general. 40K layout question.
Hmm.
Is it a pretty safe assumption that in most deployment types and layouts that you are going to have the cross objectives, the three center, the three in no man's land and
Hmm.
the one in each of your deployment zones? Is that a pretty safe assumption
Yes,
that that's what you're working with?
that's always going to be the case. You're always going to have three center objectives. There are some missions that basically take two objectives away from. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but there's a mission where you take two of the center objectives away, boom, and then you replace it with objectives that you place yourself. So your
I've
unit
heard of
has
that
to,
one.
yeah, I can't remember what
Okay.
it's called, but we don't play it a lot in our group. But basically, what it is you take them away. You take the two side objectives in the middle away. Then your units can place an objective outside of, I think, 12 inches or something like that away from the center objective and outside of your deployment zone. So what a lot of players do, it just basically the objectives just are deployed as close as possible to your deployment zone, and it's barely any change. Like, that's why I don't like the mission. It's
Okay.
just like it's barely any change. It's just
Oh,
like imagine three objectives in the middle that are evenly spaced, and then the two objectives basically just move towards the player's deployment zones on the left and right side. That's usually all that happens.
okay. And are you a tournament player?
I've played tournaments a lot. This edition, though, I just haven't had the time to go to many tournaments, but I've played in quite a few in the
Ah,
past. In 10th edition, not so much. I played in a few RTTs in ninth when I had more time on my hands, and now I just feel like I can't sacrifice an entire day at once just to go to a, Warhammer event. Unfortunately.
I I get you. Um, and okay, so I have a question for you. What do you define as a competitive player? Do you define a competitive player as someone who goes to GTs all the time? Do you define someone as a competitive player who's competitive in their local meta, in their local community, or both? Or
I
how do you define a competitive player? At
so
what, and a better question is,
uh
or and to kind of segue that is, when would I have the right to refer to myself as such?
well, I don't think, okay, so I'll answer the question directly first, and then I'll kind of tell you what I kind of think just personally on a personal level. I think the broad definition of competitive is separated into two categories. There's the, ultra competitive, who are the players that are going to be constantly participating in tournaments and competitive play, constantly tweaking their army for competitive play. I think that's what I would consider like an ultra competitive player, somebody who really plays the game
Right,
to
right,
be competitive and nothing else. I think then there's your regular competitive, maybe semi-competitive player who, plays their army to be, strong, to win games, occasionally goes to tournaments and stuff like that, and kind of, is part of that kind of group. I think I would call semi-competitive. And then there's the more casual, just average
right,
player
right,
who just plays for fun. So the reason
right.
why I say that is because I don't think, even though there's those official kind of labels, I don't think that it's really a big deal to be able to call yourself competitive or not. I don't think it's not like a moniker. And the reason why I say that is because I had an encounter with somebody a long time ago who was a really good player, and he used to be a big tournament player and everything like that. And I remember when I started getting serious about competitive Warhammer in 5th edition, I played a game against him. And I was recording everything. I was collecting all this data and stuff like that throughout the game. And halfway through the game, he was like, "Can I ask you a question? Is that fun?" And I was like, I had to really think about it. I was like, well, no, I think playing the game is more fun. And he was like, "I'm going to tell you a story. I was a super competitive player in like 3rd edition. This is an old timer." And he was like, I
Right.
brought so many different armies to tournaments and stuff like that. And what I found was the more I wanted to win, the less fun I had in the game. And I had to just let go of that. And I had to let go. And he told me that he really considered himself a competitive player, and that was a really important thing to him. And then once he realized that he just wasn't having fun considering himself a competitive player and going to all these tournaments and stuff like that, he started to change the way he thought about the game. And I think it's perfectly fine to go to
Hmm.
tournaments and to be competitive and stuff like that. But I wouldn't let it define you as a Warhammer player. Like, for example, for me, like, even if I did have the time to go to like GTs and tournaments and stuff, which I'm thinking about doing more this summer, trying to go this summer when I have more time on my hands, going to some
Right,
tournaments and
right,
stuff. But really what it is like I consider myself an Eldar player first, and like if I go to tournaments, if I'm competitive, if I'm playing competitively, then I'm playing competitively. But I don't want to get wrapped up in that stigma, right? Because the moment you start thinking of yourself that way, you're going to take your losses harder and it's going to be less fun overall. You're going to be really strapped for fun. Essentially, right?
right. Okay,
Like
I
it's a
definitely can.
spiral. It's a doom spiral, if it will, because by the way, like when he gave me that advice, I have to be honest, I didn't take it. I was too stubborn at the time
It's
to
a
take that advice. And what I noticed was
right.
the more competitive play I involved myself in during that time, the less fun I had with the game. And I became really, and it was only until college that I rediscovered my love for Warhammer 40K, because when I was in high school and I was playing against, people who were really competitive and I was really into the meta and stuff like that, yes, I was able to kind of, win more games competitively, but at the same time, I lost a lot of the people my local people that I had fun and played with before. Like a lot of them they just weren't into it. You know what I mean? Um, a great
Right. I
example
think
is
I
I
kind of
used to,
see.
you know what I'm talking about, right? Like it's
Yeah, I, I actually kind of see sort of a correlation in what you're saying, in sort of what I was saying earlier, with though it's a different reason, but
mhm,
going into the game yesterday as a, and I realize I didn't go into that game as an Eldar player.
mhm,
I didn't go into that game as a new Warhammer player. I went into that game as a blind Warhammer player, and that was at the forefront of my mind. So
mhm,
making sure I knew everything was not asking questions like I didn't know, getting like touching units, and the fact that I might not have realized exactly what it was, finding myself getting frustrated, not finding myself the ability to just chill and be like, "Yo, bro, can you run that by me again?"
right,
Like that. And I realize, like, I'm actually thinking objectively
mhm,
in that game. I don't think I asked upwards of 10 questions.
yeah,
And I realize that now. Like, I didn't ask upwards of 10 questions. I think I asked him, like, where a few things were,
mhm,
and that's it. And I think there was a point where I just was like upset with myself because I couldn't keep track of everything from memory.
right. Which is hard anyway.
And,
I mean, like that's hard for
and
people who can see. So,
I I'm realizing now as you say that that's kind of what it was.
right.
I was allowing myself to get too wrapped up in, I don't even know what that was. Like, no, I don't know how to, I mean, yeah, that's what it was. I was allowing my, and that's something that I don't usually like to happen. I hate people to see me as a blind person first, you know?
Right.
Um, and yet that's exactly what I did yesterday.
Mhm,
I saw myself as a blind person first, and not as a 40K player. It wasn't. I wasn't that person who thought Eldar were cool and thought the whole Warhammer thing, and to my everlasting shame, even Space Marines were kind of cool.
yeah.
That whole thing. I ran Harlequins because, or wanted to run Harlequins because I found the whole concept interesting. I wanted to run, the solitaire because I loved what they represented.
Right.
Um, I love the fact that this is really, so like, I love the fact that a good chunk of my army are metal models. Like, I don't plan on getting any of the new Fire Dragon sculpts or anything because I like the fact that I have metal ones. Like, I'm going to use those until I can't anymore.
Right.
I like the fact that my banshees are actually metal. You know,
That's really cool. I actually like the
uh,
metal banshees. I think a lot of the older sculpts are pretty good. They hold up.
and right. And so it's kind of like I realize now what you're saying. And when I when I used to play like Magic and stuff, and even Yu-Gi-Oh, yeah, I used to play, and I was, and I one lost, wasn't too upset about it, except for the time I got freaking wiped by that Exodia deck, but that's because I didn't even realize that he was running Exodia, and he like pulled. Anyway, sorry, never mind.
Heart of the
Whole another
cards
rant, but
moment or
yeah,
what?
I no, he was running a. This was back in like 2003 when you could run like three witches and three Sangans, and you flip and could pretty much search a piece of Exodia once you get the flip effect.
Oh God, that's horrible.
Exodia decks about 20, back about 20 years ago, Exodia decks were annoying because people would have 15 pieces and then they'd have Sangans and witches and ways to they were basically searching constantly.
Right.
Imagine like it's as annoying as how other people view our strands of fate.
Yeah, I could see that.
Just,
I could see
you
that.
know, flip.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
used to play Yu-Gi-Oh
but
too, but
I
just not
realized that.
competitively. Yeah, that makes sense.
When did you stop?
Oh shoot, it must have been, well, I was born in 1993, so I was playing in like 6th, 7th grade. So I stopped
How
in
are
8th
you
grade.
younger than me, but you've been playing? You're like uh,
I've
an
been
elder when it comes to
Yeah,
40K. I was
well,
born in
I've been
'89.
playing the Eldar since 7th grade, 6th grade. So I've been playing 40K since I was
Wow.
in 3rd, 2nd grade, 2nd, 3rd grade. I've been playing a lot.
I see. So, but
So
yeah,
yeah,
it um and and that's kind of where that is. Like I've always wanted to do something like this. And yeah, I've wanted to always kind of be a part of a community like this is kind of more the thing. And because, the part of it is I do want to, actually accomplish something. But like you said, I also want to genuinely be able to have fun
yeah,
and have meaningful memories, even if
absolutely.
those meaningful memories are somehow managing to roll a six on an explosion and then somehow roll a six on damage. And
Yep, there you go.
we just couldn't help but laugh. Like
Yeah.
we just we it was we just saw that. He's like, dude, you don't even want to see what you just rolled. I was like, hand me so I checked it. I was like, and really? He's like, yeah.
Oh my God.
And it's funny because he had like, okay, so there was a point when he had wiped one of my I think it was the on foot unit of Fire Dragon, so he wiped it down to one.
Yeah.
And Crow was firing, and the funniest shit in the world was he had to send 24 shots at this one lone Fire Dragon.
That's so awesome.
So we're like, so basically what I did was, look, I'm not about to roll 24 freaking dice. I'm gonna roll eight. If I miss one, he's dead anyway. So
Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah,
I,
that's
I go, do you know the meaning of the word overkill? He goes, I'm not sure if I know what that means.
oh God. You know what's funny? That actually reminds me of this time when I was running back in 6th edition. I was running a Seer Council. Back then you could run warlocks and up to like big squads. I was running the Seer Council, and my
Mm-hmm.
opponent was just laying his whole army into the Seer Council. And he did about, well, excuse me, he did about 8 kills on the unit, and I had the Farseer, and I had one Warlock left. And he shot something else, and he did like 14 wounds to it. And he's like, all right, 14 invul saves. And I rolled the dice, thinking, of course I'm going to die. Not a single failed save, dude. And I had fortune up, which meant I could reroll my saves, but I didn't need it. I didn't need it. I just beast moded all of them, and he
I,
was like, he looked at that, and he was like, all right, I guess they live. And
I
he was
would have,
so
I
upset.
would have put, I would have taken those models and gone and bought a lottery ticket. That's what I would have done
Yeah,
because
man. Like I've had some
Oh,
crazy good
there.
luck sometimes. Like I usually don't have like great like I'm an average kind of luck guy. I don't really think about dice rolling too much. I just roll them. I don't even think because I feel like maybe if I think too much about it, I'm gonna roll double ones or something like that. And sometimes it just comes out insane. It just comes out like six, 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 six. Like I've had dice rolls that are just like, okay, you need a double six to have your guy survive. I'm like, okay, I just roll it double six. I'm like, oh,
I
like it's
actually,
crazy.
I was, it's absolutely crazy. Like I definitely can agree, and I think that that's the key. Is I think I kind of, and I just want to say, Proxy, since I have you, I wanted to say first of all, thank you for not only being a well, I'll be honest, a guide and an inspiration on this Eldar journey. Um, I can see you genuinely love the faction, and that honestly is kind of awesome because, um, like I like that concept of like factions being like a community. That's a big thing. I'm a very tribal person. Yeah, that was a joke for all the PC people who want to get offended, but um, I'm very much into like the whole community thing, and I really like that about 40K and the faction specific aspect of things. I would say that this honestly helped, and you kind of helped me break through what was going on yesterday with you explaining about being competitive, and I kind of realized um, that I do want to be competitive, but I like, am I gonna be a freaking meta chaser? No.
Right. You
Look,
don't.
I'm
The
just gonna be
key
honest.
is playing competitively, but not defining yourself as somebody who's super competitive.
Right, right. That that's what I was. Well, and not only that, but it's like, look, I am. I have no shame putting this out there. I live on a fixed income.
Hmm.
I, you know, I'm. I'm not trying to like. How do I say this? Like, I'm not. It just to me that's just I see what how people are with that. Um, I got a thing about optimizing lists. Of
Hmm.
course, yeah, we all do that. But beyond that, it's like I'm not trying to just. Oh yes, I have to change my entire army because triple lists are the thing. Am I going to try to make something viable? Yes. Am I going to intend to make something that can actually do well? Yes. But I don't. I've made a decision that I'm not going to just chase the meta because to me
Right.
that just seems kind of pointless.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I
It's
no
it's
offense to those that do.
yeah. I mean, some people will get this reference out there, but it's like chasing the magical dragon, right? Puff the magic dragon. You're never gonna catch it, right?
Right,
So you might as well not.
right.
That's like what ultra competitive Warhammer sometimes is. Now, of course, there's those people with those giant Warhammer collections who could pretty much run everything they want anyway, but if you're not if you don't have that, then you don't have to keep buying and buying and buying just to stay on the top, because the truth is if you just play your army and get used to your army, and I talked about this with Exile Wargaming the other day, if you just dedicate yourself to playing the faction and learning the faction, the ins and outs of the faction, you will just get better at that faction and at that list. I've known people who run stuff that is really really off meta, and they have a lot of success because they know how it works. And I think that's the case with everything. Like
I
you,
mean,
you don't need to meta chase to
Custodes
be
just
good.
won worlds.
Yeah, agreed, they just won, and it's
Yeah,
like no one thought that.
yeah, Custodes just won worlds, and they've not been like I. Nobody was talking about Custodes.
Right, that's true.
So no, that's exactly and like Alec, my friend, he's like, look, give me 100, give me 100 games with an army, and I can smash any one who's running a new meta build.
Yeah, because they're not going to know how to run it.
And he's like,
Yep. Agreed.
right. He actually told me he's like, look, when I was a kid, because he's older than I am, but he's like you. He's been playing since he was a kid. He's like, look, when I was a kid, I had to save up money to buy models. Didn't have a bunch of money, so I bought these units. He's like, they weren't great, but guess what? Nobody was better with those units than I was, and I started smashing people. You know,
Yeah.
and that's I think the key is because I think that is like even me like I could have looked at yesterday as I just didn't build a good list,
Right.
and that's not what it was. Like it because I can't, and I'm not even going to sit and say, oh, the dice messed me up because no, they really didn't. I mean, uh, exploding tanks notwithstanding,
Yeah, a little unlucky there.
because that was that's I just was like really, and then oh yeah, I mean there were some moments like it's like, so you're gonna give me sixes now?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Like
It
I was
happens.
like
It
I'm
happens.
thinking, I was like maybe I should have smudged off my dice before I. But yeah, I definitely will say that things were and are interesting. I think I'll be able to go into my next game a lot calmer and able to just be a Warhammer player and not obsessing over making sure I know where everything is and not asking questions and trying to be all super whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
Because the
stupid.
truth
It was
is,
me. It was me.
yeah, at that point, you're
And I
never going
think
to
like what
learn.
had happened was like I think like what had really gotten me was I think I'd positioned my Death Jester behind some models, and I think I'd like reached over to see where something was, and then flipped my Death Jester. I didn't realize it was the Death Jester right away, and then was like, I like just was upset with myself because I didn't distinguish it right away, and it was just little things like that was, oh, see, you can't do, and that's what was going through my head. Oh, so you can't do this. See, this is pointless. That's what was kind of uh getting to me.
Right.
Although when I actually, but then I think just going through that, kind of glad it happened now and didn't happen, in games from now. But
Right. Yeah.
now I kind of know how to handle things a bit better,
Absolutely. Well, that's awesome,
and I think,
honestly.
uh, yes, and honestly, thank you for this and for this platform. And let me just say to any other, I am speaking now as a blind person. There, blind people out there, by all means, pick up an army, roll some dice. And it's funny because people kept saying you should try smaller games. Like, nah, I know I'm gonna be playing 2,000 point games. I just want to get used to them, you know.
Hmm.
And that's what I did. I built a 2,000 point list, and that's where I am. That will be my one like thing. I'm just gonna continue playing 2,000 point games. One, because I don't really want to sit here and try to reconfigure everything for 1,000 points because that's a
Hmm.
totally different type of gameplay.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, but
Absolutely.
I think that this is going to be good. And by the way, if there's any other American Indian, either Northern Indigenous or Southern Indigenous, aka Indigenous Mexican, which my grandma's Indigenous Mexican, so either Northern or Southern Indigenous, by all means, I'd love to know who you guys are and know that there's more of us out there. Um, because that's actually that would be sort of awesome. And what reservation you're from, if you're a res native like I am. So um,
Yeah, absolutely. Put it in the
I
comments.
will
If
just
you're an American
yes,
Indian, Native American, put it in the comments
I
and
will,
let them know.
and I'll just do it this way. Dukdel Anita han hechi omakia kayo champetu glahanta han owas iwashtectelo han hepi washkatek on he daya ohia wayeshni ash nahakchi ilmakti wichasha glelila washte ichin wichasha gle woksape ota yuha salechicha. Tahe washkate le Warhammer 40,000 Ayabja Pokatek ya etu wayona. Space Marine wichota wichakte po. Roughly translated, wherever you are from, tell me. Last night I played my game. Sadly, I did not win, but I am still well. This I said, and this man I'm speaking to has a lot of wisdom. So, all of those who play this game look toward the future and kill many space marines.
I figured it was something along those lines at the end. That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, man. Well, thank you
And
for
that was
coming
actually
on.
that was Lakota language.
Oh, really?
Yes, you too. Thank you very much. Yes.
Wow.
Yep,
Okay.
that was my Lakota language. That was yeah.
We're
It's,
gonna we're definitely gonna
you
have to
thought,
talk more about that because that's really cool. That's awesome.
are you Lakota?
No, 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 not me. I have a
Oh,
friend. I had a friend
yeah.
in college who was Native American. I don't know what his tribe was because when I asked him about it, he said, "Oh, I don't really identify too much with it." And I was like, "Really?" And he was like, "Yeah, I mean, my grandma's Native American, and I just never really thought that, I never really kind of got involved with that side." So like, okay, like,
I'm going to be honest.
mhm.
That's a conversation that if we were to have you would see a side of me with that statement he made that would give you a totally different opinion of who I am as a person. Mm, I have thoughts about what he said,
Mhm.
and it's just probably it would not be best for me and him to meet probably because um yeah, I can already see what that was. Um
No worries. I totally understand that
yes.
combo, and we
Oh,
can talk about that later. But
yeah,
thank you so much. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. You've been great,
you're
and
more than
I just
yes,
want to say to
and
everybody out there as well, if you're listening to this, and you want to join up and talk to Native Exarch or myself on Discord, join our Discord. I'll leave the link in the description. It's totally free. You don't have to pay a thing. You just obviously have to cancel the free trial, the Patreon free trial before it's up, and you can have access to our Discord community for free. And there's a lot of great Eldar players on there as well that would love to talk to you and hang out. So thank you so much, Native Exarch. I
oh,
really appreciate it. And do you have any
yeah,
closing remarks?
thank just everybody just take my story as an example that you have a you have an objective, no pun intended, move forward, meet it, and do what you do. Don't follow my example in the obsessing over one singular thing, but be blessed to everyone. Many prayers of happiness and good health for everyone out there, and I pray that your grandfathers and grandmothers smile upon you in a good way. Um, so I shall bless you all. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody.